It goes back to the idea again that architecture for me, I mean, it's a profession, right? So people say it's part art, part science, but you are talking about architecture, tens of millions, if not hundreds of millions, billions of dollars at stake. And then again, it's going to be a part of the city for, ideally dozens of years, decades, or even like, the subway projects or large institutional projects for 100 years plus, right? And so there's a certain gravitas and responsibility that comes with that.
Hey everyone, thanks for listening to another episode of Buildings 2.0. Today, I'm speaking with Federico Del Priore, studio leader and principal at Perkins Eastman, a global leader in architectural design. Federico, thanks for chatting with me today.
That was great, Jose. It was a pleasure meeting you and enjoy the series.
I actually want to start with the tension between humans and our lofty ideals. In fact, there's a statement that you put out on the Perkins Eastman website. We may and should start with lofty ideals as to what design is and what it can do, but we must ever be mindful that people are at the center of what we're able to do and why we do it.
Right.
After the statement, there seems to be a tension between ideals and humans. Explain, what do you mean by that tension?
Well, it goes back to the idea again that architecture for me, I mean, it's a profession, right? So people say it's part art, part science, but you are talking about architecture, tens of millions, if not hundreds of millions, billions of dollars at stake. And then again, it's going to be a part of the city for, ideally dozens of years, decades, or even like, the subway projects or large institutional projects for 100 years plus, right? And so there's a certain gravitas and responsibility that comes with that, right? So it's like you need to meet the basics of the client, whether it's an individual, an institution, the city, or whoever. And, and they've got constraints or the guardrails in which you're going to operate and create these, design solutions, budget, schedule. I need to be able to achieve these type of metrics, right? So those are must-haves. But again, it's kind of like, well, that's just the building that functions versus architecture with the capital A, right? I mean, it's kind of like, okay, I understand that that's my responsibility as a professional. But as an architect, we tend to, not tend, or maybe supposed to, like, or the people who gravitate towards it have this perspective where we can do more, right? I can add value. Okay, this is a hospital, but it's in this type of community. Like we've done this for different projects, Chicago and New York, where because we're the hospital situated, we've had these conversations where, okay, we understand the hospital has to function as very, requirement need, but it's adjacent to a park. So what if we actually did this concept where the ground floor is not the hospital's floor. The ground floor is the neighborhood's floor. It's the park's floor. It's, the campus's floor. And different things happen that anybody who's not even associated with the hospital will benefit from this building being there. And by doing that, this building being more welcome, it would be seen as a positive. Yes, it's going to be into construction, it's going to be disruptive, but it's going to actually activate a part of the city and a part of the campus that was missing something. But you still get your hospital. You still get what you needed, and now you've added that much more without like significant cost or even any cost. And those kind of ability to go beyond the required to the aspirational, and again, it's kind of saying, okay, I need this building, but you could do this. And we understand your constraints, but there's so much more we can do if we just, and let's entertain this conversation. Let's bring in people, provide space for local artists to come in, gives them a practice space, but also your patients or your staff have music on every other Friday. And there's a farmer's market in the space you created next to your hospital that didn't have a place before. Now everybody, so it's kind of like that kind of thinking that architecture, a building is not isolated, right? Even if it's out in a rural setting, it's still in a setting. And you have to kind of take all those aspects. And the users, for me, are not just the people inside the building doing what they're doing. It's everybody around the building who just walks past it, goes into it occasionally. Again, it's a kind of that enlargement of the engagement of sort of like the catchment area of the building and what you're doing.
Tell me more. So, as an architect, there's a bunch of stakeholders you have to deal with, not just the client themselves, all of their representatives, the engineers, consultants, the city, potential users. You mentioned engagement. What are other ways that you define or rather measure success? It's a little hard. There's project schedules you have to hit. That's one metric. But then the building, and then you got to see if the building is doing what you designed it to do. How do you measure that? Or how do you even think about that?
we'll start with maybe the easier one. Now, obviously, to measure how the building's doing, I mean, there's things called post-occupancy surveys, especially now with everything being smart and sort of like connected, you can get a lot of data from the building's performance to understand if, in fact, it's performing from an energy usage conservation point of view. And then, there's ways you can tweak that. So that's kind of like everything is designed in its ideal state, understanding the real world constraints, sometimes modify that, right? And things happen along the course of a project, especially over years in design and construction. So there's always going to have to be adjustments, right? There's also, learning curves for the building in terms of the facilities people who need to operate it, right? So I think measures of success are, is the building, robust enough to do what it needs to do in the future and flex, right? Especially in hospitals or, academic settings where they expand, things change, they, move around things. But I think especially in healthcare where, modalities of care change, equipment changes, tech changes, and, with the viruses. So your systems need to be robust enough. So I think that's a measure of success, is that the building is built and it can actually take on changes. I mean, we actually worked on a major project, major campus center in New York City, and the design, we were actually designing within the building as it was being constructed. And the building was supposed to have several floors of shell space for future expansion. But over the course of the project, they actually started filling it in with program that was never ever intended to be like in an outpatient facility, in an inpatient. But the building was able to take that on because we had kind of built in this robustness and redundancy and resiliency that allowed them to actually, we can put inpatient beds in what was supposed to be an ambulatory setting, and it works. So that's a measure of success, right? Can your building actually take that flexibility and expansion of their systems and practices? I think another measure is also, which I like to do, check in with clients, is like end of the project. Usually people, it's a nice new building, everyone's happy, survey tells you if it's actually functioning the way it is. But for me, a big part of that is the process, right? And you're working with people towards achieving something. If the end product was great, but the process was bare, and people are like, never going to do that again with you guys. That is clearly a failure in my respect. You may have some nice pictures for the website and all this, say, I did that building, but it's like, that's a failure, right? I mean, it's like, especially on these long haul projects where you have people who are dedicated to the project for several years. I mean, who wants to do that? Who would actually go in wanting to do that? So that's a measure of success. It's like, how are we doing? Like, and that goes back to like those candid communication lines where it's like, tell me if I'm being stupid. Tell me if I'm saying something that's just, irking the crap out of you. It's like, it's like I'm trying to communicate with you. I'm trying to actually do my job. I'm trying to actually add benefit to you. Let me know how I can make this process better. A lot of times we talk about, process improvement. It's kind of like, what should I stop doing? What should I keep on doing? And what should we start doing, right, as we go along? And, that's like a continual process because, again, project needs, project teams even change. The dynamic changes. So what worked with one group of people who were like in the initial concept, charrette, brainstorming session may change over the course of time as it gets more technical and, you get a certain maybe set of people who are working a little bit differently, which is fine. But it's like, so you can't just kind of let it run its course, assuming it's going to go the same way for the entire duration. Yeah. And I think also it's just, the user's response to like what we suggest during the design process. I think, again, for users who may not be as familiar with, doing projects, maybe the first project, or they don't necessarily read plans or drawings that well. If you're doing maybe some type of physical or virtual mock-up where you're able to communicate the design, and then, we get very direct feedback as to what works for them and what doesn't. And then when we come back and modify it, they're like, yeah, this worked. Like that type of feedback is just, feels really great when you get it right. And that's just, another way to make sure that what we're doing is actually going to meet the user's needs. And it's all about communication. You have to make sure people understand what you're trying to do, what you're drawing, what you're representing. Architecture engineering has a lot of terminology. Behind you is a graphic of a Revit model or, BIM. So it's kind of like, what are those blue things? And, what's the red? It's like people don't necessarily understand what you're looking at if they're not familiar. So it's all about communication to make sure that in the end, they get what they expected. I mean, even relative to your background, we would walk the facilities personnel through the BIM model so they could actually look at where the valves are and where the, VAV boxes are that they need to adjust. So they're comfortable with what they're going to get, in 3D so that, can I get a lift up in there? Can I actually get access to that damper, when I have to, change it out? So again, it's kind of like making sure that you're able to communicate because this is all real physical stuff. When it goes in place, it's very hard to change it. So you need to kind of do whatever you can to get it right.
I want to zoom in on that. So you're on the front lines of state-of-the-art healthcare hospital design in, 2024. What are you asking yourself as a designer, as an architect, that may look different from hospitals designed 10, 20, even 30 years ago? What are you considering?
I mean, there's a couple of things that we really push and focus on in our design, and others are starting to see that as well. And some of them are more obvious than others, like flexibility, right? The whole idea of flexibility. I mean, like hospital buildings used to be very sort of static, very regimented, repetitive boxes, if you will. But now, in terms of the design, I think it's more, again, that flexibility, whether we actually use like, demountable partitions or robust infrastructure, IT infrastructure to enable, for that flexibility over time. Like if you're building in, additional capacity in your MEP systems, or the, resiliency, again, for sort of like weather events that are, more and more of a concern. And then also in terms of the users, I think it's, the focus on the patients and their experience. Like every patient's a little bit different, but there's some commonalities and the ability to which you're able to enhance the patient experience. And that's gained a lot more popularity. But again, something that we've been doing for some of our clients for over a decade, where you're really trying to understand, when a patient comes into the building or even before they come into the building, like what is their experience in terms of trying to provide them with the best experience, healthcare experience, and also just emotional experience. Because again, depending on your situation, whether it's cancer or some other type of like, surgery, people are scared, people are stressed, right? So the idea is really trying to understand the user in terms of like, what are all the different touch points that are going to make their visit better, whether that's, technology so that they can take care of stuff themselves. Because, some people, like an airport and other like hospitality, some people just like to do their stuff without interacting with a person if they don't have to. Not because they're antisocial, just because they have their way. They think they could do it faster. So when they're there, everything is behind them and they're just dealing with the clinicians and the care. Other people need a little bit more handholding. So it's kind of like the ability to understand that those, that spectrum of like engagement of the patients needs to be accommodated in the physical design, right? So there's some tech embedded. There's also maybe some areas that you create where, a clinician or a care coordinator can sit down with the patient on the side and go through things on an iPad or, whatever it is. How you need to facilitate that. And I think also, same things on the users, because again, we start to get more and more here about patient experience, but another part of it is really clinicians and, the nurses, physicians. And obviously with the pandemic and other things, there's been like the whole burnout of clinical staff, right? And they go through a lot. And again, especially in like cancer patients and where they're dealing with death or, poorer outcomes and they would have wanted, they need places and spaces to kind of recoup and regather themselves and just like be off stage for a little bit, or even just, like a place, a phone booth where they can make a call, like a personal call for their kids. Cause, teacher called them, but they're in the middle of their shifts. So that, people need to be able to do the things they need to do during their work, but also in their personal life. It just makes for less stressful and more effective care if you're not worried about things because you're able to take care of them, right? Because you need to focus on the patient, but some things come into play that you just need to take care of personally as well.
Yeah. As an architect, you sit down and you hear, what I assume to be the owners and then their stakeholders, the patients and whatnot. And you're on the receiving end of just how can we make an incredible experience for our nurses, doctors, users. And then somehow you have to translate that into stuff like
Right.
wall, glass, some embedded tech. How do you think about the translation between all of like what you mentioned is the deeply human and emotional side of sickness or cancer, combined with some of the basic principles of architecture, whether it's how we think about a particular space, light, dark, enclosed, open. How do you start to carefully make those translations as to what a better experience is?
I mean, I think it starts with, again, understanding the users and, almost like literally walking with them during their day to understand like even before patients come in, like nurses are doing things, clinicians are doing things, certain thing has to happen to prepare the space for people to come in. So, that might be more heavy on like the back of house workflows, like how do materials move? I mean, flow is a big thing in hospitals, right? So you have, like materials that, come from different areas of the hospital and need to populate, the clinics and the ORs and stuff. Some of them need to be sterile. Other pathways are just, for, doctors or lab technicians to go from their workspace to the areas of the patient, but not necessarily through the public spaces. And then there's, the public route, right? And again, it's kind of like they see certain things, but they're not supposed to see other things, right? Or they're not allowed in certain areas. So I think a big part of what starts to kind of create the spaces and the places is the flows, right? To understand the flows, because that's like again, depending on the size of the institution, you have hundreds of people, thousands of people in this building, all coursing through it, especially like in a larger hospital cancer center. So you really need to understand like the pathways that happen over the course of time of the building for the various users. And that really starts to, where like entrances might be and where like, the support spaces might be, whether lower in the building, the backside of the building. And then the other piece is understanding, again, the day-to-day, like what is the first step in a process when a patient walks in, right? There might be 1A, B, C, and D, right? You have to have like it can happen 3 different ways. Okay. So then, you start to understand to support that activity, we could do it a couple of different number of ways. And we hear, okay, you guys prefer this, but we're also going to say, well, other institutions we've worked for do it this way. So there's like a little bit of dialogue. You start to create these like bubbles of like opportunities and constraints around each of the activities, like in a building, right? And then you basically take all that and you start to say, okay, so we know they need line of sight. If someone's walking down a long corridor, it'd be nice if there's like some daylight as a cue to make a turn. So it's intuitive wayfinding. It'd be nice if at the end of the hallway, it wasn't just a door, it was actually a window or like a break room or like, a little nourishing area. So we start to view the must-haves with like moments that make sense to people intuitively, but also we know it's actually going to feel good when they, they reach the end and they actually have a place to sit. Or, it's even like providing benches and elevators for people who are like more disabled because, not everyone wants to stand and, they're coming to a hospital. So some people are less mobile than others. So excited. I think it starts with like all the different little behavioral settings and the tasks that happen in there, of course, of the day and all the different touch points, whether it's the touch points on, the equipment and technology or the actual physical patient and the staff. And then, with like traditional things, you would start to create some type of aspirational mood boards, where it's like, okay, like there's the functioning part of the hospital and things have to happen. And then you can add like these flourishes, but it's also like for the institution or the client, like, what is your aspirations for this? Like, what is this building telling or doing for people? Like, is this like your model to like a shift in your method of care? Right? Is this trying to embody different processes that you didn't do before? Or do you have your set standards and we know, okay, these are guardrails, but we can deviate a little bit, right? We can add those values that you didn't think of that don't detract and actually add to the experience.
Well, to execute on the program, on the concept, ultimately you have to kind of put pen to paper. I'm curious, in your day-to-day, like what tools have you found most useful to execute on this? You talked about the importance of visualization in efforts to communicate. We're not using Mylar anymore. So what are you currently using that you find most helpful?
It really depends on the phase, right? If you're in the really conceptual phase, I mean, a lot of, at least the healthcare projects, there are a lot of repetitive units, right? So, patient rooms, you could have hundreds of bedrooms, dozens of procedure rooms, ORs. So there's a lot of repetitive modules. So sometimes it's just understanding sort of the pieces and almost putting them together as a puzzle, right? I mean, it can vary from because of the gridded nature or the modular nature, sometimes we even use Excel to just do colored squares and start to say, okay, I need, 100 patient rooms of this size. So this many boxes, right? And I hate the idea of saying boxes because, at least for me, I tend to find sometimes medical planning, it can get myopic, where it's like, I'm going to design everything in this box so it performs perfectly. Like, okay, what if it wants to be a rectangle? What if the box actually wants to, morph a little bit? It's not the same old box. It's like Where does this box belong in this whole building? But that is a tool just to kind of get you in the ballpark. It's like, okay, I need to accommodate all of this in my building. And then it's really, again, it could be simple SketchUp models to start to, elaborate some type of forming or massing. Obviously architecture, it's interiors and exterior. And again, with the healthcare project, because so much has to happen in a certain sequence, it's not maybe as flexible some other project typologies. It tends to get planning heavy, but I think the challenge there is always, at least for me, making sure that, our planners are, ideally, they're not sort of limiting design opportunities, but they're ideally actually creating design opportunities with their planning, right? And some people say design. I mean, design is really everything. Design is planning. Design is the technical detailing. It's the massing of facades, selection of finishes, creation of spaces, lighting, all that. It's kind of your job or your focus might be planning, medical planning, and you might be more like curtain wall exterior, but everyone needs to understand the whole thing. So that again, they're kind of creating opportunities for their teammates to, dovetail with their work or even add to their work. Yeah, but I think a lot of it is basic like diagramming in 2D, and then we get into 3D blocks so people start to understand the spatial relationships. I mean, we use Revit, SketchUp, Rhino, all those basic graphic software.
How big is your team on any particular project?
I mean, I've had as many as like 24 architects
Jeez.
and interior designers and planners to some of them as small as 4. It really depends on the project size. I mean, most of mine have been fairly large projects, and I've even like on the subway project for Hudson Yards before being at Perkins Eastman, that had multiple architectural teams. So I was actually overseeing people from other architectural offices as part of the architectural team, and that was again like 24 people at one point.
So what's the day in life of someone who is not a lot of me designing a building is hard enough. Designing a team and managing a team of 20, 30 folks is in and of itself a challenge. I mean, what's a day in life look like for you? At a globally recognized firm. I mean, what's your morning to the evening look like?
It varies. I mean, a lot of it is just understanding. First of all, it's always, checking emails to see if there are any fires or any grenades that were thrown overnight or something like that. I think it's also touching base with the team, either like a overall, perspective, like, team huddles, so everyone understands like, things may have changed or priorities may have shifted a little bit, as well as meeting with like literally over the shoulder, just stopping by people's desks to, see how things are going. Especially more junior staff, to make sure that they're like, asking the questions that they need to ask or having the information. And because again, some people don't know what they don't know. And as I think a benefit of a lot of the firms at Perkins Eastman is that we have very literally open office structure and also hierarchy, such that, I'm sitting next to people of different levels and they're sitting next to me hearing things that I'm saying, and I can kind of see if they're struggling literally by just looking at their monitor and just say, oh, you should go talk to her. She'll know, right? So it's that kind of check in. And again, it goes back to communication is key. And then, sometimes it's work that I have to do, right? Whether it's something relative to the client interface or contractual, or even just maybe reviewing drawings or something. Or it's, making sure that, again, people have what they need and all the dots are being connected. I mean, especially like, as you tend to, move up in firms and manage larger and larger teams, it's more about the communication. And it's not so much the doing, although I do very much still have my hands in things, probably much to the chagrin of my teammate. Yeah, and I don't think you should ever really get yourself removed, no matter where you are, find yourself in an organization or project team structure. You should never really be removing yourself from the project that much that you don't know what it takes to get something done, or you can't comment on design or on detail if something needs improvement or whatever. So yeah, there's a lot of meetings, a lot of emails, again, touching base with people, again, responding to what the client needs at a particular time, and then checking in with the client as well, because, it's not only the better relationships are not if you're just reacting to what the client needs, but you're actually anticipating and, reaching out to them, being proactive and advising them sort of as we go.
I imagine part of your day is just also considering new work. I mean, I think to design and build great work, you need to continue landing new projects. I'm curious, what have you learned about the art of winning projects?
I think the environment has changed where, at least on institutional clients, a lot of times before they used to have sort of, you had established long-term relationships, and that would be sort of like a source of repeat clients, which we still have and still is there. But I think I'm finding that more and more like clients are looking for, firms or designers outside of their normal sort of collection of people they were working with. So it's much more competitive, right? So I think all the more reason that you need to kind of be in touch with even our consultants who get information about potential projects from their people they know, maybe on the facility side. The engineers maybe know different people typically than we do on the client side. So it's that communication. It's being at industry events. It's being able to speak at be on panels or present at conferences. Making yourself available. Just kind of trying to keep your fingers on all the different streams of information. There are industry like newsletters and platforms where information is being published about up and coming, and it's really just talking to people because when something is out on the street in terms of a request for a proposal RFP, it's kind of like, well, everyone knows about it, and you're not ahead of the curve. You're just going to be like in the mix with everybody competing. But the trick is really to try to get a sense in advance of what might be coming out on the street, as it were. But also, ideally, you're in relationship with clients where they're coming to you and actually bouncing ideas off of you because they trust you as an advisor and as a resource where you can, again, sort of understand what their goals might be. And those conversations sometimes actually change what they're seeking for in terms of a design. Like a lot of times we've had conversations with clients about certain things they were thinking. And then in the course of a conversation and some like preliminary work we do, we help them determine that actually you shouldn't build a new building. You should actually probably renovate your existing one with a small, you know what I'm saying? It's kind of like we do this due diligence and, conceptual master planning. And we've helped them define what they actually need. And that I think is critical too, because again, you've got so much money and time invested in these projects that you really need to, you make the commitment to build something or renovate, significant dollars. And you want to make sure, especially with the changing landscape of healthcare, telemedicine, different modalities, equipment. Again, whatever you do has got to be flexible enough when you pull the trigger, because you're going to be living with that building or that renovation for, decades, and it's got to be able to adopt and adapt.
You mentioned earlier the importance of alignment and incentives and the different stakeholders. Oftentimes, there's quite a bit of both resources, effort, money on the line to get this one thing right, this,
Right.
Space. And yet you're dealing with a bunch of different stakeholders and slightly different incentives. From your perspective, has anything evolved or changed from the way that we can create better incentives from the client, architect, stake, and other stakeholders, or not?
I think definitely like sort of like the alternative delivery methods like progressive design build or integrated project delivery, again, and there are variations where, the more you can bring the ultimate full project team together early on, just again, you streamline the process. A lot of times, we've been in sort of projects where it was supposed to be like design, bid, build. But over the course of the project and talking with the client and sort of when, I'm thinking of one renovation project that really kind of mushroomed, and because it was an existing building, it was a spec office building being converted to an ambulatory care facility, a whole lot of can of worms got opened as we started getting into the building. And, there were budget concerns and schedule concerns. And again, we, like I said, you've got a certain budget. So there's certain like design moves that are just, kind of prescriptive, if you will. Said, I don't need to design. If you're looking for a standard elevator, like type fit out, I don't need to like design that documented. You can bring the contractor on. We can do like a design assist, design build where they just design it and we kind of review it. You know what I'm saying? So kind of that accelerated that piece of the project, which helped, with the whole overall thing mushrooming, ballooning, and actually I literally gave up feedback to the client, right? Because it was for the betterment of the project. And that was kind of like, it's almost like a way of IPD where you have this integrated approach to the project. Same thing if you bring on contractors early, it's like, I'm going to like engineers are going to design a certain routing for their ductwork and piping and stuff like that. And it has a certain level of detail that's required. But when you go into fabrication, there's a lot more stuff, a lot more, like flanges and coupling and valves and things that stick out. So the layout changes. So again, it's kind of like no one's going to see it. It needs to perform. So you could create performance specs and again, engage a contractor early on, a trade partner, where they're doing like the layout work as part of their like, leading to fabrication drawings, right? And again, that's a way to accelerate. And it's kind of like, okay, we're improving the process. Everyone's going to benefit from this. And again, those are like non-binding, like integrated project delivery. It's just the normal contract, but things change over time. And I'm seeing more of the design team and the owners and the contractor receptive to, engagement early on and saying, handing off to people that would normally not be taking this early on. So definitely see that as a growing trend. And a lot of clients, once they kind of taste the benefits of IPD, some institutions like, that's all we're doing. I'm not doing any other project delivery method, right? And of course, larger institutions or city agencies, you would imagine, are much slower to adopt. But even there, we see like some of the New York City agencies, design build was like a stretch for them, a couple of decades ago where they would never do it. And of course, now it's like pretty dominant. And then even IPD in New York and the East Coast is taking on, more and more traction with clients. So definitely there's that shift that we see.
I want to take a step back. Why buildings for you? So you could have gone into a bunch of different career routes. Did your love for the built environment start in college, as a child, growing up?
Yeah, it's kind of a cliche. I was drawing as a kid from the beginning, cars, planes, ships, buildings, like cities, Rube Goldberg type things. I was also very big on Legos and, then Legos didn't come with all these like hundreds of specialized customized parts and branded kits. You had to like make it all up yourself if you wanted to curve surfaces, And then also, again, it's kind of like cliche, but I think, that coupled with like working with my father in the family business and also just around the house, like I was doing like electrical work and plumbing and carpentry and landscaping with him like in my, early teens. So I always had like this practical, physical aspect of things. Also just liked materials. There's something about when you actually saw into a piece of wood or like work with stone. So I was very much into the crafting of things, like with the model building and stuff. But I think the telltale sign was in kindergarten, right? Again, this is when I was in kindergarten, a little bit earlier than you were in kindergarten. We had building blocks, but building blocks are actually like 2x4 wooded sections. They weren't like the foam blocks we have today. So I think at 5, built a house that you could actually stand inside in class. And of course, a lot of kids wanted to get inside the house and it all came crashing down. And then I was forbidden to play with blocks for the rest of the school year. So becoming an architect was my way of getting back at my kindergarten teacher. It's like, now I can play with all the blocks I want.
You have the benefit now of years since that incident, and you've worked with different clients, different projects,
right?
Different geographies. What would you tell that kid in kindergarten as to what maybe the Lego blocks and building blocks did not teach you? So one thing is making sure that stays up. If you had to tell that kid, with the benefit of hindsight and your experience, also to be mindful of this, and this, what would you tell yourself?
Don't listen to other people who want to keep you from doing things.
That's fair.
I think for a lot of people, like certain things resonate with us, and it's like being self-aware and trusting your instincts. Because I do think instincts, and people gravitate towards certain things. That's based on their mind, their physical capabilities, or their interests, their family background. So I think it's really just like kind of like for me, I couldn't imagine doing something professionally that wasn't related to like building or design or construct, something like that. I just knew just based on my interest in like again everything I've done, that's just the way it would go. So and I think that's fortunate. A lot of people find themselves in positions where they're questioning what they're doing, and I don't like what I do every day, but generally I like what I do.
And I think when you're working on hard problems like putting structures up, it's naturally some things are fun and other things are just slog.
Yeah,
as a part of it.
Yeah. I'm using Excel way more than I wanted to, in like going through design school. But those are some of our tools to get some things done.
Federico, this is super fun. For folks that want to follow your work, follow your team's work, where can they find you?
PerkinsEastman.com. our website, and it's got a link. And I mean, Perkins Eastman, I've been focused on healthcare, but again, before that, I've done everything but healthcare. And actually, I think that actually helps my healthcare work, because I mean, I did like science, technology, infrastructure, performing arts, recreation facilities, community centers. And I think, again, it's a lot of times when you have those outside perspectives coming towards a particular, building prototype, those help in, like, you see opportunities that maybe others who that's all they do don't see. And Perkins Eastman is a great place because we do all of that. So there's always that mixing of ideas. And then LinkedIn. So basically, I'm there, LinkedIn, and on perkinseastman.com.
Federico, thanks so much for
Okay. All right. I'm glad we can make this work. I know it was a little bit of a challenge, but it was a pleasure meeting you. And yeah, it'd be great to do this again.